Good morning, everybody. This is kind of a fun little exploration here in StreamYard and trying to do a live presentation. So hopefully this is going to work well. I do understand that there's a time delay between what I'm saying here when you hear it and when I get to see the responses. But I'm going to try to stay as engaged with the commenting as possible. And I'm going to give it just a minute for those who might be coming in a little bit late. That's quite all right. My goal in this thing is, like the whole thing says, is it's prompt mastery for AI visuals. And I'm hoping that you guys are going to get a lot out of this. And I just saw Sean say good morning. So good morning, sir. And Eric, good morning to you. Hey, this is actually working pretty good because I'm actually seeing comments on my board inside of StreamYard. So fantastic. Well, what I want to do with this is as we're engaging, there may be something that'll kind of pause you and you'll go, okay, that's interesting. Actually, how do you do that? Let me know. I want you to feel free to reach out, make comments as we go on with this. Of course, this is going to be streaming live right now. The recording, of course, you can't make comments and get feedback right away at that point. But anyway, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to approach this from the perspective of I've literally got somebody sitting beside me and I want to have a conversation with you in regards to my philosophy, my thoughts around how AI can be affected well. Awesome. Sean says it's 12 a.m. in Singapore. So, dude, that's huge. Thanks so much for giving of your sleep. That's much appreciated. And hopefully this is going to be well worth your time. Okay, so for you guys jumping in, I'm just going to have fun. And I'm going to pull up my presentation here. And prompt mastery for AI visuals. Now, this is a little bit of a learning process, but hopefully the engagement will flow. It'll make sense, and you guys can get a lot from it. Way back when I did my very first book, I actually had this in the book as a breakdown of some 4 key thoughts that you need to have regarding your prompting. And I called this segments. And this is kind of how I was mentally breaking things up, almost like a math formula. And I said at that time, we have a descriptor, we have a style or influences, and we have how parameters. Now, within the descriptor, you have subject, the details, and the environment. Under styles or influences, we have styles plus media plus artist. And then the how parameters are basically the parameters that affect things. And this basic structure works. It continues to work. But what I've done since then, for anybody who's purchased a copy of my Midjourney book, Back to Basics, Beginner's Guide, inside of that book, I have a detailed framework. And I'm going to somewhat go through that, but I want to dig in a little bit deeper and give you guys some beneficial frameworks with which you can approach your prompting, because the goal here is prompt mastery. And what I mean by that is not just having a specific follow this exact process and you'll get the results, but I want to help you think AI. I want to help you understand how you can engage, whether it's in Midjourney, Leonardo, Adobe just lost that thought there. Whether it's Midjourney, Leonardo, I'm seeing echoes of myself, apologize. Adobe Firefly, even if you're prompting inside of Photoshop and trying to engage with the Firefly prompting, it really doesn't matter where you're coming from. What we're trying to do is we're still in a text-based engagement with the different AI platforms. And so we want to be able to frame our verbiage in such a way that we're going to get the results we're after. So I want to walk you through that process. Now, of course, this is the very rudimentary when I first got started prompting in AI. I came up with this structure. We're going to go a little bit deeper and get a lot more results. Yes, that's right, Helen. It was Firefly. I know it was struggled for just a second. All right, so we're going to jump in and begin looking at this. Okay, so from my book, I talked about Leslie Lamport, and I mentioned that you probably might not know who it is if you're not an avid reader in tech journals and things, but if Leslie Lamport didn't exist, then everything that we're doing right here, including being able to get onto the web, would not exist. He created some very interesting concepts that built the framework of the World Wide Web. But he has a statement here that I think is very powerful, and I'm going to use this as a framework to help you understand my approach to prompting And it all makes sense in just a second. He said, people confuse programming with coding. Okay, get that in your head. He's literally separating the two concepts. Programming is to coding what typing is to writing. Writing is something that involves mental effort. You're thinking about what you're going to say. The words have some importance, but in some sense, even they are secondary to the ideas. In the same way, programs are built on ideas. They have to do something, and what they are supposed to do is like what writing is supposed to convey. If people are trying to learn programming by being taught to code, well, they're being taught writing by being taught how to type, and that doesn't make much sense. Okay, this to me is the core of what we're going to be doing inside of any of the AIs when it comes to prompting. I'm not focused around coding. I'm not focusing on the framework. I'm thinking more along the idea of what is the idea you're trying to convey. So from his concepts, I came up with these two sayings. Number one, art makes sensory perceived models of concepts reality. Okay, this is the overarching concept of what art actually is. It makes sensory perceived models of concepts. In other words, ideas that we have, art makes those ideas reality. It helps us to flesh out a concept. Next is learning to prompt for engaging with the AI from a set of rules to leverage its implementation is like learning to type to become a writer. So this is the funny thing. This is called prompt mastery for AI visuals. Yet I'm starting this whole conversation by explaining that the goal here is not just about learning a set of rules in order to get the results you're after. I want to teach you how to think and communicate more effectively so that you can get the results that you're looking for inside of AI. Okay. So I've got a chapter in my book called Learning to See, and this is where I think the whole thing starts. The first thing to prompting success is learning to see. Now, what I want you to do is take a look at this image. It's pretty easy to understand. We're looking at some kind of greenery. There's some water down below. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to really observe it. I'm actually going to remove myself from the screen. So all you're seeing is this image. When you're seeing this, I want you to think about a couple things. Number one, what is the setting? In other words, what is it that you're actually looking at? What is this all about? Number two, what time of day do you think it is? Obviously, it's not nighttime because there's definitely some sunlight on the plants. But here's the thing is we're learning to see. So I want you to pay attention. When I'm saying, what time of day do you think it is? Think about why you're thinking of that. Why do you consider it definitely not nighttime? Okay. Who or what is the subject? Okay. Next is, what do you think the time period is? Is there anything in this that sets it to a particular point in time? Next, I want you to mentally break the image into levels and determine what's happening in the foreground, that space that's closest to you, and what's happening in the middle ground, and then, of course, what's happening way off in the background. Think of this in layers. Okay. Now, I asked a series of questions, and hopefully you kind of followed along with this and you kind of followed along with me. But here's the thing. Now, in regards to all of those questions, what's the setting? What time of day is it? What or who is the subject? When is the time period? And what are the different foreground, middle ground, and background elements? Here's my question is, how do you know? This is really key because when we're trying to convince ourselves of something, we're looking at details. We're seeing nuanced elements that help us to make a determination around what it is we're seeing. The problem is most of us have just approached this from a mindset of it just kind of happens. We're just sort of seeing it. But here's what I want you to do is I want you to begin to really see, to really observe and to pay attention. So as we're looking at this, what you need to be able to answer for yourself is how do you know those things? And then after that, how can you tell? Like it's one thing to know, but it's another thing to effectively communicate the thing that you're seeing. Okay, so I've kind of broken this up and we'll go into this a little more detail in just a second, but here's the key thought with this. What we're trying to do is we're trying to learn how to see the thing that we're trying to create. Okay, this is our next section. Learn to describe. This is going to be where we're going to refine prompts for more precise results by learning to describe. This is a lot of fun because we're going to take the concepts of learning to see and we're going to transition over to this next phase of learning to take the things that we're seeing, even if it's in our mind's eye, and expressing those things with our words. So with this particular image, this is where we're going to kind of start with that idea of learning to describe what it is we're talking about. Okay. When you're working with any of the AI tools, the first thing you want to try and do is you want to create a summary. What we're trying to do is we need a basic concept. When I'm looking at this overall image, what is the summary idea that we're trying to express? In the last image that I showed you, it was obviously some kind of jungle setting. And there was a river that flowed beneath. The time of day, it could have been midday on a cloudy day, could have been morning or night. Really don't have the details in that setting. But what we were able to do is we're able to look at something and create a summary of what it is we're after. Okay, so for this one, start with a summary. Here's the summary I have for this particular image. A young girl with a ponytail, dressed in a pink and white striped shirt and blue jeans, exuberantly dancing in front of a large oil painting of a ballerina. Okay, this is where most people stop. They just kind of put the core concept down and they're like, okay, good. I've got what I was after and I'm happy and Midjourney is going to do whatever I want it to do. Great. But here's what I want you to think about. As you see this, this is our summary. This is the base level element of our prompting. A lot of times I'll do this as just my basic prompt, and that's okay because I'm going to do other things with it. But the thing is when you're creating an image, you need to be the creative director. You want to guide the image to the results that you're after. You want to come up with a more precise way of communicating with the AI in order to get back the results that you're trying to achieve. Okay? So in this, we've got a basic structure to work with. When I was in college, my degree was communications with an emphasis in commercial art. So I took a lot of painting and drawing classes. And one of my instructors was Brian Jekyll, and he was a master illustrator. Brian said, when creating an illustration, everything in the painting needs to help tell the story. Anything that does not further the story along is distracting. Okay, with that in mind, we want to think about the image we're trying to create. And this is not just the knots that we don't want to have, but more specifically, let's start with what we do want to have in the image. Now, what we're going to do is consider the 12 essential prompt elements. If you've followed me for any length of time, you've probably come across my 12 essential prompt elements. I don't include these in every single prompt, but they're here. I keep them in mind for everything that I'm doing. And then what I want to do is I'm going to break down each of these essential prompt elements and talk about how you can utilize these in the prompting that you're going to create. Now, we already have a basic concept of a summary about this image that we're seeing of this little girl dancing in front of a painting, and it looks like a Renoir painting in the background. So we've kind of got that base down. But how do we take it to the next level? Let me show you. Here are my 12 essential prompt elements. And you'll see that they're kind of broken down and grouped accordingly. So the first two are subject and action. Then underneath that are setting, lighting and atmosphere, composition. And then next row is medium, style, angle, perspective, then time period and feeling, orientation, and knots. That's all 12 essential prompt elements. Now let's actually take a minute and look at each of these and how we can use these in our prompting. Subject's pretty easy. This is the primary object or character that will be depicted in the image. It can be a person, an animal, a vehicle, or any other object that can be visually represented. Okay, so we get that. Subject, verb, agreement. So this is the concept of basic language. Next is the action. So this is the specific activity or movement that the subject is engaged in. Now, when I go back to our prompt from just a second ago, we understand this is our little girl. And what do we know about her? Well, we've got a subject idea, and that was established in our basic summary. Let me go back here. A young girl with a ponytail, dressed in a pink and white striped shirt and blue jeans. There is our subject. Now, what about this girl? She's exuberantly dancing in front of a large oil painting. Got it. So now we have our subject and our action. What are some other details that we can have here? Well, the next prompt element, our essential prompt element, is going to be our setting. The setting is the environment or context in which the subject is located. Okay, so when you're looking at this painting, it's kind of this illustration or this image, it's kind of an easy idea of where this girl probably is. From a painting that large, it's possible that she's in a museum. And so we could kind of use that as a point of reference to define what we're trying to create regarding this little girl in the museum. Next is going to be the lighting. Now, lighting is a huge component to your visuals and to your storytelling piece. So with lighting, this is the quality and the intensity and even the type of light that illuminates the scene. It can dramatically affect the mood and tone of the image from bright and cheerful to dark and foreboding. So with lighting, it's basically, what is it light? What is it lit like? What does it appear to be? And in our setting, let me go back so we can see the little girl. In our setting, there's good lighting. It's probably interior lighting. And because it's in a museum, it's going to be protected lighting. You don't have to worry about the bright, harsh lights coming in and fading the paintings. And so we want to keep in mind the lighting that's going to occur in this space, and it's going to give us that setting. Now, if we said it was nighttime, the lights were off in the museum, you could also use lighting to create that environment. Next is composition. So a composition is the arrangement of visual elements within the frame of the image. In other words, it goes from the left to the right corners of our image, and it basically creates the overall composition of how you want things to be positioned and what the image presents. Okay, so with this, it includes considerations such as the placement of the subject. Is the subject centered? Is it following the rule of thirds? Is it far left? Is it at the bottom? Is it at the top? So we need to figure out where we want our subject to be placed. Next is the balance of positive and negative space and the use of lines and shapes to create a sense of harmony or tension. Whenever you're painting or drawing or creating an illustration or you're taking a photograph, these are considerations that go into that when you're trying to create a result that you're after. Okay, so all of those things get played with in the composition. Next is going to be style. I'm going to go ahead and get back up to here where I was. Next is style. Style is the overall aesthetic or visual styling of the image. This could be realistic, abstract, naturalistic, surreal. It can also be influenced by a number of factors. We actually have inside of Midjourney the ability to affect a variety of stylings, which will affect the overall look and feel of the illustration. Next in this is going to be the angle and the perspective. This is the point of view from which the image is presented. Okay, so right now, I've got my camera positioned just so on my computer screen so that I'm trying to frame myself and be positioned somewhat center in this as presentation that I'm doing. Okay, so I positioned this camera just so that when I look straight ahead, I'm eye level with my camera. Now, positioning this camera can give you a totally different perspective. For instance, by dropping myself lower, it gives me a different context. The same idea whenever you're prompting your image. Think in relation to the camera and the subject and how it fits into the image. In other words, Put yourself behind the camera when you're thinking of composing your image. Do you want to be above the subject looking down on it? Do you want to be below it looking up? Do you want to have a bird's eye view, a worm's eye view? Do you want a broad, wide format image? Each of these things positionally create a different dynamic for how to feel about the image. We'll look at some of these in a little bit. Next is going to be our medium. The medium is the physical or artistic medium in which the image is created. It can influence the texture, the color, and other visual characteristics of the image. This can be painting, photography, digital media, etc. So this is where you get to come in and say, I want to create a Lego minifigure, and it basically defines the overall structure for all the things that are created. Kia, you're extremely welcome. Okay, so medium is what basically the image is going to be presented as. Is it going to be a sculpture? Is it going to be origami? Is it going to be fabric? What is the actual structured thing going to be? As you create from a medium, it's going to influence how things get handled. And so you're able to totally modify the look of things just by adjusting the medium. Hi, June. Okay, and then next is going to be our time period. Okay, so each of these are all kind of playing into the overall how you engage with your prompting. With time period, this is the historical or cultural context in which an image is set. It can influence the choice of clothing, of architecture, and other visual elements that evoke a particular era or culture. One of the things you can do with a lot of platforms like Midjourney is you can simply say circa, C-I-R-C-A, with a year. And that will put the overall composition into that mindset, that framework. That's a simple, easy way to kind of get a time period in place. But here's the fun thing, is once you invoke a time period, it bears with it all the other elements. For instance, circa 16th century oil painting, well, we're dealing with a time period and a medium. And so suddenly there's going to be imbued upon this a whole series of visual elements that's going to convey a time. Okay, next is feeling. It's easy to kind of stop with, okay, Brian, you're just throwing a whole bunch of stuff at us. Why does feeling matter? When you're looking at an image, what is the feeling you want to convey? Feelings matter. In this case, the feeling is going to be the emotional or psychological state that the image is intended to evoke in the viewer. This can be joy, excitement, fear, and sadness, and a whole range of all the other emotions that can be in place. Here's the thing. Part of my chapter in my book that talks about details that matter, I explained that we don't want to just stop with sad. When you stop with a single word or a single concept, you're limiting the benefit you can have of layering in the flavors of that feeling. Use descriptive wording. Drew spends a lot of time talking about this, and I'll show you some of his prompt information a little later on. I love that he talks about prompting and using tokens that are weighted. In a sense, it's words that have power and oomph behind it. So don't go with the first word that comes to mind. Sad is a very limited expression. Instead, take your word, sad, and run it through a thesaurus. You can actually go to ChatGPT or your favorite large language model and simply say, I'm looking for some really descriptive terms that mean sad, and allow the large language model to give you some ideas. And then from those, you can take it a step further and say, what I really like for you to do is give me some colorful descriptions of a person that is sad. And it will begin fleshing out a visual identity or a visual description that you can apply to your prompting. Okay. Next is orientation. And this is a combination of both aspect ratios and also the terminology that would work in relation to that. For instance, the aspect ratio of an image is the ratio of its width to its height. Okay. It can affect the overall composition and balance of the image, and it's controlled by a parameter inside Midjourney. A lot of different tools. You basically can select the option that most appeals to you, and it applies that aspect ratio. But don't stop with just, I told it to be a 16 by 9, so it's a 16 by 9. Think in relation to what the story is you're trying to tell. It goes back to the quote from Brian Jekyll. Let me go back to that for just a second. When creating an illustration, everything in the painting or our illustration needs to help tell the story. Anything that does not further the story along is distracting. So think in relation to your visual. Why are you choosing the aspect ratio that you are? Is it wide just simply because you need to fill that space? Some of the things that you'll find when you're prompting and you use an aspect ratio in your prompt is often the AI tries to accomplish a very complex set of information with your verbiage and with the frame that you've given it to work within. In other words, if you tell it to come in really nice and tight, and you give it a square shape, it might not compose it just like what you're looking for. Yeah, Big Al, you're right. In advertising, let me actually pull this up here. In advertising, feeling is extremely important in the visual because it relates to the viewer's feelings about the product. And this is key. When you're trying to communicate visually, the feelings really need to kind of come into play with what we're trying to communicate. Okay. So here's the list of things. And then knots. Knots within your prompting is going to simply be any elements or themes or items that you want to avoid. Now, inside of Midjourney, you accomplish this with a hyphen, no, and then you follow it with what you don't want to include. And this, it's not looking for sentences. It's looking more for key terms. Sort of like if you had a box of crayons and you don't want a red crayon, you would simply do -- no red crayon. That way it understands very succinctly what you're after. In this, I don't tend to use a whole lot of no's unless in prompting, I'm finding that it wants to make something happen regardless of what I tell it. Okay, so from this, we've seen a full breakdown of the 12 essential prompt elements: subject, action, setting, lighting and atmosphere, composition, medium, style, angle, perspective, time period, feeling, orientation, knots, or exclusions. This is a lot to keep up with. I get it. But here's the thing. What I want you to do is go back to where we started with learning to see. Think about the image and the thing that you're wanting in your mind's eye, what you're seeing, and then think of, how do I best describe that? How do I take and use the terminology that's going to give me the results that I'm after? Now, in the book, I spend some time where I talk about kind of going through each of these processes of looking at each of the elements. For instance, like with the little girl, I started with the little girl in front of the painting, and then I explained how we can look at, well, what is the setting and what is the lighting and atmosphere? So you want to kind of do that with your prompting. You want to think of the elements that are key to this. So I'm going to hide me for just a second. And this is the prompt that was used to create the illustration that you're seeing right here. And actually, this one was a 7x5, but same prompt. Photograph of a young 5-year-old girl with a ponytail, dressed in a pink and white striped shirt and blue jeans, exuberantly dancing in front of a large Renoir-style oil painting of a ballerina dancing in a large frame in a museum. The photograph is joyful and jubilant. Modern magazine feature story, DSLR, rich saturated colors, and high attention to detail. Aspect ratio is 5:7, style raw, stylized 350. Okay, so there's a lot of information that was packed into that little prompt to get the result that I was after. Okay. Details that matter. Refining prompts for more precise results by focusing on what matters. Now, I spent time talking about learning to see and then learning to describe. So what is a detail that matters? So this is the tricky thing. Whenever we're taking all of our concepts and we're kind of dumping it together and we've kind of broken it down, here's our subject, here's our action, this is the setting that I want. All of that information is information. It's sort of like when we had to write papers when we were in school, and we collect all this data and we got all these details. And what we're trying to do from those details is begin to select the key pieces that make the point that we're trying to make. So the details that matter are going to be focused around this concept. I'm going to hide me for a second. Okay, here is an example of the 12 essential prompt elements at play. I've got a subject, I've got an action, I've got a setting, lighting and atmosphere, composition, medium, style, angle, perspective, time period, feeling, orientation, and knots. All of these are in place, and the image that you're getting is what you see right here. Now, what you'll notice if you read through this whole thing is not all of the words are in the exact same order, and not all of the words on the left are actually showing up on the right. So I'll give you a second to look at this. I'm going to show you how we can then take this to another place in regards to our communication. Okay, what is our subject? Well, in this case, it's the expansive Sahara Desert. What kind of medium is this? It's a high-resolution digital photograph. And so that's in here. It's a wide shot from a low angle. That's going to be our angle and perspective. I tell it that it's a high-resolution digital photograph. And there's feelings involved in this as well. It evokes solitude. It's stark. It's expansive. Okay, so you'll see that I've placed inside of my prompt descriptive terms that kind of amplify the feeling and the idea that I want to make sure is conveyed. Here's the other images that were created with that. Now, from here, I actually modified. Let's see if I can hide this branding. There we go. I've added in a new subject. Everything else is pretty much the same, except for now in this one I've added in close-up wide-angle photograph of a nomadic traveler beside his loaded down camel. The nomad's hazel eyes studying the distance with his head covered in a traditional desert dweller's head wrap, covered in dust, background vantage of a low angle. Okay, so I've moved from this position to add in a subject with that same information taking place in the background. Let's take it a different step. We can change our camera angle and our relation to our subject simply by modifying the position. So in this, I said, wide angle photograph from behind a nomadic traveler walking beside his loaded down camel. The nomad's head covered in traditional desert dweller's head wrap. Notice the information is the same, covered in dust. I used that in the last prompt. The nomad is approaching a small desert oasis with a few sparse trees and a traditional stone well. So there we can see in each of these is the few trees and a stone well. But because I've told it to be a wide angle photograph from behind, it's removed us from being right up next to this character, and he's now in the distance ever so slightly. So all of these different elements, they come into play in how to work with composing the story that we're trying to create with our visuals. Okay. Next, let's push them a little further away and go with a different angle. Wide angle, extreme close-up shot of footprints in the sand. And the rest of the information is still there. This time, though, we no longer have the oasis in the background, so that's hidden. But we're basically ground level in the tracks looking at our nomad in the distance. Now let's take a little different vantage point. This time we're going to go higher. So now we got the wide angle, but it's going to be a bird's eye view of a distant nomadic traveler walking beside his loaded down camel in isolation, far below in the distance. Notice the terminology I'm using. I don't just say wide angle bird's eye view and leave it there. Often you have to come back in with a few more details, more pertinent things that's going to help establish the story you're trying to communicate. Now let's change the position of our angle. And in this case, the stark expanse of Sahara Desert in a minimalist, high contrast photographic style. This is the prompt I started with, but now here's what I've added. Wide angle, extreme close-up shot of a hand pulling a leather-covered flask from the sand. This is our traveler but the focus is going to be on the details regarding the hand and what he's doing. And so the positioning of our information is going to change the structure of our prompting. Overall, this is the same prompt over and over again. I'm just changing the position of our camera and the subject matter that's being focused on. And one thing I want to add is I've mentioned this before, but do not limit your thinking to prompting being your only solution to a finished result. Often, I know for us who play in Midjourney and some of these other AI tools, the challenge will be, well, I want to make it happen. I'm going to bend it to my will. I'm going to force it to accomplish what I'm after. And what we end up doing in that process is we can kind of get frustrated because, like, the prompt I asked for was supposed to be further off and more distant, and it was a little too tight. So, utilizing Midjourney, I could basically diminish the size of my image and have it to do an expand, and it created this more separate from the subject image. So don't get frustrated because the result with a prompt doesn't give you the exact result you're after. We can work with other elements inside of our prompting to accomplish this. Now I want to show you a couple of my friends' really good prompt structures. And this is Rory Flynn's image elements. His breakdown is very similar to what I've got, but he has a little bit different approach to it. His is subject plus action, who and what they're doing, the environment or where it is, the color scheme, this is the highlighted colors, lighting, time of day and lighting conditions, composition and shot type is how it's captured, the mood and emotion is feeling and senses, camera plus lenses plus film stock, this gives you a specific look and feel, textures are highlighted textures, and then details and modifiers are just the additional information. Now, from this prompt framework, you get something like this. Here's his prompt: minimalist Icelandic landscape, high angle black mountains, ocean landscape, dark atmosphere, muted colors, extreme contrast, award-winning composition, dark black, crisp white, sharp resolution, calming photograph. And so all of these, here's a breakdown of where all of those fit within his image elements. And by adjusting the terms, much like I was doing in my 12 essential prompt elements before, you can get a totally different thing. So similar background, but he's got a different focus. Close-up surfer, frozen mustache, wearing a full-body wetsuit covered in frost. While all the rest of this is the exact same prompting as what we had in the last image. We can do it again. Wide angle shot, similar kind of concept to what we saw in the last image. Here's the footprints in the sand. And then here's different shots of the surfer doing what a surfer does, even in Iceland. So by adjusting the elements that make up your prompting, you can get the results that you're after. We each can have different approaches. And this is one of the things I was mentioning to June yesterday. One of the things that's really cool about AI and creativity is each of us comes to our exposure and our experience with engaging with the platform. And sometimes we can feel like, well, the things that I know probably doesn't relay very well in the prompting that I'm after. What's amazing, though, is if you know how to communicate with another person about the thing you're trying to create, then you can be very effective in your prompting with AI, whether it's working with Midjourney and trying to adjust the prompting. It's going to be based off the structure that you flow to the AI and describing the thing you're trying to create. Having a basic framework is very, very helpful, much like the 12 essential prompt elements or what Rory does with his, which is the image elements. This is very good, straightforward structure, and it works for creating the storyline and the thing that you're trying to create. And I'll add another, Drew Brucker. So with Drew, I call his power tokens framework. And this is where he uses a subject, action, framing, atmosphere, and storytelling modifiers. Now, Zib just said, great info. How do you control the lighting and the sun direction? You need to describe, based off of the composition, the direction that it's coming from, what time of day it is. You want to give those essential elements that's going to describe what you're trying to create. Drew is very good with this because his his emphasis is going to be on what I call power tokens, and what he refers to as power tokens. It's basically words that bring more weight to them. Big Al is in the audience, and he and I did a book last year, way back when Midjourney was version 4, and we talked about in there $5 words. In other words, words that have greater impact on the structure of what you're trying to communicate. You'll find that when you're using certain words, it adds more oomph or more weight to it. So like up here where it says subject, the central focus of the image, person, object, or scene, and it says physical description. Instead of just simply saying a figure, it's a lone figure. Instead of an artifact, it's an ancient artifact. You want to add additional details to expand upon the prompting by giving it descriptions. Make sure that the words work to help tell the story. Okay, the other thing with action is dynamic or static actions. And each time when you're describing something, don't stop at just the figure's running. How is he running? What is it that he's doing that makes him really stand out in this visual? Anyway, this is some really good stuff from Drew. Take a look at all the different prompt elements that he's created, and he's got a lot of great resources for you to use. Now, here's a breakdown of working with his framework. The subject, start with the main focus, a lone figure standing on a cliff edge. Action, add what happens or is happening or how the subject interacts with the scene. So what is it our subject is doing? He's gazing at the horizon as storm clouds gather. Okay. Framing, specify the camera angle, aspect ratio, and composition. So I'm saying it's going to be low angle. That means we're going to be somewhat below the horizon line looking up. Aspect ratio is going to be 16:9, which you see here. And centered symmetry. So basically, here's our character. He's in the middle, and it's somewhat balanced. Next is atmosphere. Set the mood with lighting, shadows, emotions, and colors. Volumetric lighting, muted tones, melancholic mood. Everything's kind of sedate and calm in this, and so the visuals are very powerful that way. And then storytelling modifiers. This is optional, but they add symbolic or conceptual depth. Point of view of a bird soaring above, dynamic motion, ethereal glow. Again, we're using a lot of language to help tell the story. All of that fit together, and here's an example of what that looks like. Okay, so that was a lot of things I just kind of dumped on you in a hurry. But hopefully you can kind of make sense of the structure here is, number one, you bring to your prompting the knowledge and the experience that you have. Don't think of the AI as like this programming language that you've got to learn. Think of it from a perspective of you're trying to communicate something that you're wanting to create. In order to do that well, you need to have clearly here what you're trying to create. That's where the strength of what you're doing as a creative director comes into play. You can use the terminology that's relevant to your industry and your experience. Next, when you create a sentence and you're trying to write a story, dear Brian, here's what happened. Okay, think in that framework when you're prompting with the AI. Don't get lost into the nuanced elements of I need it to be just so in order to get the results I'm after. Here's the thing. The things that are most important, they need to be closer to the beginning of your prompt. So that's why I always say start with a summary. Get an idea, a core idea that what you're trying to communicate. What is that? Summarize it into one sentence. Then from that, begin expanding upon it to give the details that are pertinent to make sure that that truly comes alive with what you're trying to create. All right. And then as far as frameworks, take a look at the examples that I've shared. Follow Rory. Follow what I post on a regular basis, and learn from the prompting that's there. The beauty of looking at what other people create is you can get an idea and get inspiration that can then be applied to what you're creating. The key here is to be descriptive. Make sure you use language that has oomph behind it. Don't just go with the first simple solution that you're after. Add depth. Okay, so let's look at questions that might come through. There's a slight delay, but if you have some, feel free to send them on. Yes. So Diego, sometimes what is most difficult for me is knowing how to express to the AI what I want. find the right words. Okay, I understand this and I can definitely wrestle with this concept. Here's the beauty of large language models like ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or whatever. Have a conversation with them. And I've actually taken and used my entire prompt structure, my 12 essential prompts, and built custom GPTs where I can have a conversation with it and have it basically answer or ask me a series of questions that leads me to that result. So what we can do is basically adjust the visuals with that. We can basically kind of say, here's the general idea I'm trying to go with. Help me fill in the blanks. What are the things that I need to consider to round out this image? And that'll be a huge help. Yes, Rory and Drew are fantastic. Okay, Big Al. The little girl in the museum has some orange paint or something near her collar and bottom front of her shirt. This is a distraction because our eyes are drawn to it. However, if the overall story we're using this image in is about a girl who loves painting, has been taken to an art museum, and she wants to do a painting of a ballerina as soon as she gets home, in that case, the paint on her shirt is part of the story, not a distraction. Yes, I agree with that. So this is the trick with whenever you're prompting is how does it fit in its use? What is its intent? So often we see people create things that are visually interesting, but what is the story? The story needs to be a driver for everything that we're trying to do. We want to make sure that we're communicating with the result in mind. And Judith is absolutely right. Use AI for finding those words. And I love this one also is simply set the stage. We want to make sure that we're kind of laying out the structured framework of what we're trying to communicate and use the language that's going to express that well. Okay, a lot of things covered here. Don't stop at this point. We've got some other things that are an asset. So for one, the ailab.substack.com. Every single day, literally every day, I post an article on here. And it's not just about Midjourney. It's about all kinds of AI tools for the creative professional. Be sure and take a look and see if there's some assets that could be a benefit to you. Right now, there's over 300 and some articles just from this year alone. This could be a huge resource for creatives who are trying to integrate AI into the creative workflow. Next is the-ai-lab.com. This is where I've got courses. I've got a course on Midjourney, and I've got some more courses that are going to be coming up in the new year. And what I want to try to do is, instead of create a whole bunch of things that I want to do, I'd rather focus around things that are beneficial to you guys. So I'm going to be doing some workshops up and coming, and I would love to kind of get your feedback on things that would be important and valuable to you. So I'll be posting a link to this, and I would love for you guys to kind of say, hey, Brian, that's awesome. This is what I'm really interested in. And so be sure and send me information that's relevant to where you're at in the industry. Here's an awesome thing is over the past month, I've contacted over 1,000 creative directors that's in my LinkedIn profile community. And I've had a number of live conversations and back and forth conversations around AI integration into what they're doing. And I found a lot of holes in the process and ways that I think I could be a huge asset. So I'll be putting that information out, and I'm looking forward to kind of sharing with that those things to be a help to you guys in the creative industry. Again, hopefully this was an enjoyable exercise. A lot of information covered. This recording will be made available to everybody who was participating here. And excuse me, the file, if that's something you're interested in, just comment below. I want it, and I will make sure that you get a copy of that PDF document that was my presentation. So you'll have that as a resource. Again, excuse me. Thanks so much, guys. Hopefully this was an asset, and I look forward to seeing these things put in place by you guys. One last is Helen. Fabulous, Brian. You had me learn to see. That's fantastic, and I'm excited about that. So again, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys create in the AI space as creative professionals. Enjoy and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thanks so much. God bless. Bye, you all.